It started with a phone call. Daniel was in his home office, organizing old family photos for a surprise anniversary album, when his wife Linda's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, so he picked it up out of habit, intending to silence it. The message on the screen froze him in place. "I can't stop thinking about last night. Meet me again tomorrow?" For a moment, Daniel's world tilted. His hands began to shake, and he felt a tightness in his chest. Who could this message be from? Was this some kind of mistake? He stared at the number, unrecognized but saved under Mark. He told himself not to jump to conclusions, but curiosity gnawed at him. He clicked to view the message thread, hesitating as guilt washed over him. The last thing he wanted was to invade Linda's privacy, but what if this wasn't innocent? The exchange was damning. Days' worth of flirty, suggestive texts, talk of secret meetings, and plans made while Daniel had thought Linda was working late. He couldn't believe what he was reading. The woman he'd shared the past 15 years with, the mother of his children. Was this the same Linda? Daniel decided not to confront her immediately. If this was what it looked like, he needed more proof before taking action. With his heart pounding in his chest, he quickly forwarded the messages to his own phone and erased the notification. As Linda came downstairs humming softly, a towel wrapped around her hair, Daniel forced himself to act normal. "Hey," she said with a warm smile. "What are you working on?" "Just organizing some old photos," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "You should come take a look later." But even as he spoke, his mind was already racing ahead. Who was Mark? How long had this been going on? And how far had Linda gone to hide it? Stick around to the end to find out just how deep this betrayal runs, and the lengths Daniel will go to uncover the truth. This story is just beginning, and nothing is as it seems. That night, Daniel barely slept. Linda lay beside him, breathing softly, while his thoughts churned like a storm. He replayed every moment of their marriage in his mind, searching for signs he might have missed. Had she been distant? Distracted? Was there a reason she'd started spending so much time working late or taking those sudden weekend yoga retreats? By morning, he had a plan. He wouldn't accuse her outright. He needed solid evidence, not just a string of texts. If Linda was hiding something, he had to uncover it methodically, without tipping her off. When Linda left for work, Daniel acted quickly. He called his best friend, Jake, someone he trusted more than anyone else in the world. Jake had always been the no-nonsense type, the one Daniel could count on when things got tough. "Jake, I need your help," Daniel said, his voice low. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, sensing the tension. "No, it's not," Daniel admitted. "I think Linda's seeing someone else." There was a pause on the line. "What makes you think that?" Jake finally asked. Daniel hesitated before explaining everything, the texts, her recent behavior, the gut feeling he couldn't shake. Jake was silent for a moment, then said, "All right, let's figure this out. First, you need to know where she's going when she says she's working late. If you can find that out, it'll tell us a lot." Daniel agreed, though the idea of following Linda made his stomach turn. He hated the thought of sneaking around, but what choice did he have? That evening, when Linda said she had a meeting at the office and wouldn't be home until late, Daniel sprang into action. He waited until she left, then grabbed his car keys and followed her at a safe distance. His heart pounded as he tailed her down the familiar streets of their neighborhood, through town, and then, unexpectedly, to a quiet, upscale neighborhood he didn't recognize. She pulled into the driveway of a large, modern house, turned off her car, and walked inside without a second glance. Daniel parked a few houses away, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Who lived here? Was this Mark's house? He sat there for what felt like hours, watching the house from the shadows. Lights came on in the living room, and he could make out two silhouettes, Linda's and a man's. They were laughing, leaning close. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. The betrayal was real. Stick around to see how Daniel uncovers the truth behind this secret meeting and what shocking revelations are waiting just around the corner. Daniel's hands trembled as he sat in the car, staring at the silhouettes in the lit-up window. Linda and the man Mark he assumed were close, too close for anything to be innocent. He clenched his jaw, trying to push down the anger threatening to take over. Acting impulsively wouldn't help him now. He needed answers. The man stepped closer to Linda, placing a hand on her shoulder, and Daniel's heart sank further. He felt like a stranger watching the life he thought he knew crumble before his eyes. Every moment felt surreal, like he was trapped in someone else's nightmare. Suddenly, the front door opened, and Daniel sank lower in his seat. Linda stepped outside, phone in hand, speaking quietly. She paced the driveway, her voice barely audible over the hum of the streetlights. Daniel strained to hear, rolling down his window just slightly. "It's risky, but we'll figure it out," Linda was saying. "He suspects nothing." Daniel's chest tightened. She was talking about him. Linda's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it before sighing. "I've got to go back inside. We'll talk more tomorrow." She hung up and walked back into the house, leaving Daniel reeling. Suspects nothing? Did she really think he was that blind? As the light in the living room dimmed, Daniel decided he'd seen enough for the night. He drove home in silence, his mind racing. He didn't know who to be angrier at, Linda for betraying him, or himself for not realizing it sooner. The next morning, Daniel was a man on a mission. He sat at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him, scrolling through a list of private investigators on his laptop. If Linda wanted to play games, fine. But he was going to make sure he had every piece of evidence he needed before he confronted her. Later that day, Daniel met with the investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire who listened intently as he explained his suspicions. "I need proof," he said. "Photos, video, whatever it takes. I need to know what's really going on." Claire nodded. "Leave it to me. If there's something to find, I'll find it." Over the next few days, Daniel pretended everything was normal. Linda continued her usual routine, oblivious to the fact that she was being watched. Claire sent Daniel updates, photos of Linda meeting Mark at a cafe, walking hand in hand in a park, and, finally, entering the same house Daniel had seen the other night. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, Claire called Daniel, her voice unusually tense. "Daniel, I need to meet with you. There's something you need to see. It's more complicated than we thought." Daniel's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" "I'd rather show you in person," Claire said. "Meet me tomorrow morning." As Daniel hung up, his mind swirled with possibilities. What could Claire have found? Was it worse than he imagined? Or was there more to the story than he'd realized? Stay tuned to discover the shocking revelation Claire uncovers and the devastating truth about Linda's double life. The story is far from over. Daniel barely slept that night, his thoughts consumed by Claire's cryptic words. "More complicated than we thought." What did that mean? He played out every worst-case scenario in his mind, each one more painful than the last. The next morning, he met Claire at a small diner on the edge of town. She sat in a booth, a folder resting on the table in front of her. When she saw him, she gave him a faint smile but didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Daniel, I've been in this business a long time," Claire began as he slid into the booth across from her. "And sometimes things aren't as straightforward as they seem. I think you should prepare yourself." She opened the folder, pulling out several photos and laying them on the table. Daniel's eyes widened as he took them in. There was Linda, as expected, but she wasn't just with Mark. In some photos, there were others, a woman at the cafe, another man at the park. Each interaction seemed intimate, secretive. "What is this?" Daniel asked, his voice low. Claire tapped one of the photos. "Your wife isn't just having an affair with Mark. She's living multiple lives, Daniel. From what I've pieced together, she's involved with at least 3 people. Each one thinks they're the only one. And then there's this." She handed him a document. Daniel's stomach dropped as he scanned it. It was a bank statement, showing large transfers to an account he didn't recognize. "She's funneling money into a private account," Claire explained. "It's significant, thousands of dollars. I don't know where it's coming from or what she's planning, but it's clear she's hiding more than just infidelity." Daniel felt like the floor was falling out from under him. "She's stealing from me?" Claire hesitated. "It's possible, but it could also be connected to these other relationships. We need more time to uncover the full picture." Daniel sat back, his mind racing. Linda wasn't just betraying him, she was lying on a level he hadn't even imagined. The woman he thought he knew was practically a stranger. "Can we find out where this money is going?" he asked finally. Claire nodded. "I can dig deeper, but it might take a few days. In the meantime, I'd suggest being cautious. If she's hiding this much, there's no telling how far she's willing to go to protect her secrets." Daniel drove home in a daze, his thoughts a chaotic mix of anger, disbelief, and sadness. He couldn't confront Linda, not yet. He needed more answers, and he needed to protect himself. That evening, Linda came home as cheerful as ever, kissing him on the cheek and chatting about her day. Daniel played along, but every word she spoke felt like a knife in his chest. "Are you okay?" she asked at one point, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You seem distracted." "I'm fine," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "Just work stuff." Linda nodded, seemingly satisfied, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching him more closely than usual. The next few days were agonizing. Daniel continued to act normal while Claire dug deeper, uncovering more details about Linda's secret life. Each update brought new shocks, more money transfers, more meetings with Mark and the others, and hints of something bigger on the horizon. And then, one evening, Claire called again. "Daniel," she said, her voice urgent. "We've got a serious problem. I think Linda knows someone is watching her." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "She's been acting differently, changing her routines, checking over her shoulder. She even confronted someone I had tailing her today. Whatever she's planning, I think she's onto us." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. Linda was always one step ahead, it seemed, but this time, he was determined to stay in the game. Stick around to see how Daniel maneuvers through Linda's web of lies and uncovers the devastating truth she's trying to bury. The stakes are higher than ever. Daniel felt the walls closing in. Claire's warning echoed in his mind. Linda knew someone was watching her. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about survival, uncovering the truth before Linda could erase the evidence or twist the narrative. That night, Daniel pretended everything was fine, just as he had been. Linda cooked dinner, humming softly to herself, while Daniel sat at the table, his appetite non-existent. "Long day at work?" she asked casually, handing him a plate. "Yeah," he muttered, forcing a smile. "You know how it is." But as he watched her move around the kitchen, calm and composed, his anger boiled beneath the surface. How could she act so normal? How could she smile, knowing what she was doing behind his back? Daniel needed to stay sharp. He excused himself early, retreating to his office and locking the door. He had an idea, a way to outsmart her before she could catch on. The next morning, Daniel visited his bank. He requested detailed statements for all their accounts, carefully combing through each transaction. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. Consistent, unexplained withdrawals that matched the amounts Claire had identified. Linda had been siphoning money for months. But there was something else, a payment to a private investigator. Daniel's stomach churned. Was Linda already trying to cover her tracks? Or worse, was she investigating him? As he left the bank, his phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Daniel, I've got news," she said. "I followed up on those bank transfers. The account they're going to is linked to a man named Mark, the same Mark your wife has been meeting. But here's the twist. The account is joint." "Joint?" Daniel echoed, his voice sharp. "Yes. Mark and your wife share it. She's funneling money into their account, likely funding their future together. But that's not all. I also discovered Mark has a history. He's a con artist." Daniel froze. "A con artist?" "Exactly. He's been involved in several schemes, preying on vulnerable people for financial gain. I think Linda is either complicit in his scam or one of his victims. Either way, this isn't just an affair, it's a setup." Daniel's head spun. Was Linda being used? Or was she willingly betraying him, helping Mark bleed him dry? Claire's voice broke through his thoughts. "Daniel, whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. They've rented a property under Mark's name, and Linda has been seen there frequently. I think it's time to confront her, carefully. But you'll need leverage." Daniel nodded, though she couldn't see him. I need proof, concrete proof. If this goes to court, I want to make sure there's no way Linda or Mark can twist the story. Understood, Claire said. I'll gather everything and meet you tomorrow morning. Be ready. That evening, Daniel couldn't help but watch Linda more closely. She seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly and disappearing into the bedroom for long stretches. When she finally joined him in the living room, she had a guarded look in her eyes. You've been quiet lately, she said, sitting down beside him. Just tired, Daniel replied, keeping his tone neutral. Linda studied him for a moment, then smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Daniel forced himself to nod, but inside, he was seething. Her lies were unraveling, and soon, she'd have no place to hide. Stay tuned to see how Daniel confronts Linda and exposes the truth about her connection to Mark. The web of deceit is about to collapse, and the fallout will be explosive. The next morning, Daniel met Claire in her office. She handed him a thick envelope filled with photos, documents, and transcripts of conversations between Linda and Mark. The evidence was damning. This is everything you need, Claire said firmly. Bank records, surveillance photos, and proof of Mark's criminal history. You're ready, Daniel. But tread carefully. Linda won't take this lightly. Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't want to confront her in a fit of rage. He wanted to be calm, methodical, and above all, unshakable. That evening, when Linda came home, Daniel was waiting in the living room. The envelope sat on the coffee table, a silent accusation. Hey, Linda said, hesitating as she noticed his serious expression. Is something wrong? Sit down, Daniel said evenly, gesturing to the couch. Linda's eyes flicked to the envelope, her smile faltering. What's this about? Just sit, Daniel repeated. She sat, her movements stiff, and Daniel slid the envelope toward her. Open it. Linda stared at him for a moment before picking it up. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the contents. As she flipped through the photos and documents, her face paled. What is this? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. This is your double life, Linda, Daniel said, his voice steady but cold. The texts, the meetings, the money, you've been lying to me, stealing from me, and planning a future with someone else. And not just anyone, a con artist? Linda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, she managed. You don't understand. Then make me understand, Daniel shot back. Tears filled her eyes, but he didn't flinch. It's not what you think, she said desperately. Mark, he's been blackmailing me. He threatened to ruin us if I didn't cooperate. Daniel raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. So, you gave him our money? Lied to my face? How long has this been going on, Linda? She hesitated, the tears now streaming down her face. A few months, she admitted. I thought I could handle it, that I could protect you and the kids. But it got out of control. Daniel's jaw tightened. And what about the others? The woman at the cafe? The man in the park? Are they blackmailing you too? Linda's face crumbled, and she buried her head in her hands. I was trying to find a way out, she sobbed. Mark has people everywhere. I didn't know what else to do. Daniel stared at her, his heart torn between anger and confusion. Was she telling the truth, or was this another layer of lies? Claire found out where the money is going, he said, his voice sharp. You've been funneling it into a joint account with Mark. That doesn't exactly scream blackmail, does it? Linda looked up, her face a mixture of fear and desperation. I had to make it look like I was cooperating, she said. If I didn't, he said he'd come after you. After the kids? Daniel didn't respond immediately. He didn't trust her anymore, not after everything he'd uncovered. You know what I think, Linda? I think you've been caught, and now you're scrambling to cover your tracks? No, she cried, reaching for his hand. Daniel, please, you have to believe me. I never wanted any of this. I love you. Daniel pulled his hand away, his face hard. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied, cheated, and stolen from me. Linda broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but Daniel didn't feel pity. He stood, towering over her. Here's what's going to happen, he said. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. And if you think you're going to walk away from this unscathed, think again. I'll make sure Mark is exposed for who he is, and you'll face the consequences too. Linda looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror. Daniel, don't do this. Please. For the kids. Daniel's voice was like ice. The kids will be fine. But you? You're going to have to face what you've done. Stay tuned to see how Daniel takes his final stand, exposing Mark's schemes and ensuring Linda faces the justice she deserves. The truth is out, but the battle isn't over yet. Daniel stood at the edge of the cliff his life had become, ready to fight his way back to solid ground. After Linda's breakdown the previous night, he had no more room for doubts. The evidence spoke louder than her tears. The next morning, armed with Claire's documentation and his own resolve, Daniel visited his lawyer. Together, they planned a strategy to not only secure a divorce but also to protect Daniel's assets and bring Mark to justice. We'll file immediately, the lawyer said, scanning the evidence. But you should also report this to the authorities. Mark's criminal history combined with this financial evidence could lead to serious charges. Daniel nodded. I want this done the right way. No shortcuts. That evening, Daniel confronted Linda one last time. She was in the kitchen, staring blankly at the window, as though she knew this was coming. I've filed for divorce, he said, his tone firm. And I'm reporting Mark to the authorities. Her shoulders sagged, but she didn't turn around. I suppose I deserve that, she said softly. You deserve worse, Daniel replied, his voice cold. But I'm not going to stoop to your level. This is about moving on for me and the kids. Linda finally turned to face him, her eyes filled with regret. I didn't want this, Daniel. I never wanted to hurt you. You did, he said simply. And now you'll have to live with it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The police launched an investigation into Mark, uncovering a network of scams he'd orchestrated over the years. Linda's involvement became a gray area. Was she a willing accomplice, or had she been coerced? Either way, her reputation was in ruins. For Daniel, the hardest part was telling their children. He sat them down, explaining in the gentlest way possible that their mother had made mistakes and that things would be different moving forward. They cried, of course, but Daniel promised them they'd get through it together. As the dust settled, Daniel found himself in a place he hadn't expected. Peace. His home was quieter, his mind calmer. For the first time in months, he could breathe. One evening, as he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, his phone buzzed. It was Claire. Mark's been arrested, she said. They're charging him with multiple counts of fraud. As for Linda, it looks like she's cooperating with the investigation. She might avoid jail time. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the weight of the news sink in. Thanks for everything, Claire. I couldn't have done this without you. My pleasure, she replied. Take care of yourself, Daniel. You deserve a fresh start. And a fresh start it was. Over time, Daniel began to rebuild his life, focusing on his kids, his work, and himself. He realized that the betrayal, as painful as it had been, had also freed him. The person he had loved was gone, replaced by someone he no longer recognized. But in the wreckage, he found something he hadn't expected: strength. As he watched the sun set that evening, Daniel felt a quiet sense of closure. The storm was over, and he had survived. And perhaps, just perhaps, the best was yet to come. Please, if you liked that video, like, subscribe, and comment.